It's 8:23 in the region. Chuck Pullen here. Larry had to get on out, go teach them children's. So one of the things I was asking Joe earlier, I said, Joe, I want to talk about what's happening in New York City with Zorhan, Mom Donnie, and I wanted to talk about this. I was trying to get Matt, and I wanted to get you guys to talk about this because I think this is, again, one of those issues that involves young people. So, and you said, I don't know anything about this, and so that's perfect. I'm going to mold you like a big ball of clay. And so when Matt first started doing this, we had the same discussion. Do you think in your circle, do you have, are a lot of your friends politically active? How do you learn about politics and what's going on? And don't say TikTok.
No, me personally, it usually comes from my dad is a Trump supporter and my mother is an immigrant. So they both tried to shape me in their own way, and I get both sides of it. So I kind of just read both and try to formulate my own opinion. But like I said to off air, is that I never really followed politics before joining this show, and I decided to do that because we talk about politics so often on the show, and I'm starting to formulate my own opinions. I don't know exactly where I land. I'm probably closer to a Democrat than a Republican. I don't know.
You're young.
Sure.
It's fine. That's how it works.
But
once you start getting paychecks and seeing how much taxes they take out, you're supposed to go to the right. But then also that they're spending just as much money. So I always say when people get their first paycheck, that's when the libertarians who get a hold of them go, hey. You see how much you're taking from it's all, that's the whole thing. It's like once you start seeing how much comes out of your paycheck, once you start really following how much you're paying in taxes, that's you're like, well, where's this money going, right? That's sort of the thing. And we had that same discussion, last week with Lieutenant Governor about here in Indiana. Just because it's a Republican state with a Republican supermajority doesn't mean that we are fiscally conservative. And that's sort of the, my inherent issue with both parties is that to me, the number one issue is that debt, which is why we had the debt clock here on the screen a few weeks ago when we hit $37 trillion in debt and nobody talked about it.
I remember seeing the missiles, like the whole news about us bombing Iran, and the first thing I don't know why, but the first thing I thought, because I was out, because it was kind of like later in the day when I saw it, like I was out at a restaurant/bar with my family, and the first thing I thought, I was like, dang, work is gonna suck, and the debt clock definitely just hit whatever landmark you were trying to hit.
Yeah. Well, and that becomes, that's always the point I'm trying to make, is that war is not cheap. War, there's an old saying, war is a racket. And that's sort of the thing, is that when you get into this whole idea of the military-industrial complex, you can go back to Eisenhower warning us about the military-industrial complex, and then who was followed by Kennedy, who talked about, the shadow government, and he talked a lot about the shadow government, and then his head mysteriously blew up one day in Dallas, and you can get into all that. So that becomes the question, is that war is a racket, and both parties are inherently funded by that military-industrial complex. So while it may not benefit me to blow up a mountain in Iran, it benefits them. Or even the idea of getting involved in the Ukraine and giving them, when we talk about giving the Ukraine stuff or money, we're giving them a lot of weapons. There's this whole thing where we're not giving the weapons to the Ukraine, but we're giving it to NATO. We're giving it to Europe, who then gives it to the Ukraine, so we can wash our hands of it. And it's just this whole thing about how war is a racket. And that's sort of my inherent issue, is like, we're just getting involved in another war? Are we accomplishing anything? Are we just spending a lot of money on bombs and B-2 bombers and, all that kind of stuff? But I wanted to get into this because this is an interesting story coming out of New York. So Zorhan Mamdani, who is the favorite to become New York City's next mayor after winning the Democratic primary, has a contentious plan, and some of the things he's talking about, he wants to build a network of city-owned grocery stores. He has a lot of plans. The proposal has been blasted as a Soviet-style disaster in waiting, economically delusional. So there's all these things that he, as sort of a young democratic socialist, is pushing, but it's very popular among young people in New York City. So one of the things that's happened, and I've talked about this at length with Matthew, is this idea that your generation is kind of getting the short end of the stick when it comes to, costs have gone way up. Everything is more expensive. It's harder to save money. It's harder to basically, get out of your parents' house and do your own thing, start building a life for yourself. And so one of the inherent side effects of that is when somebody like Mom Dami comes around and says, hey, we're going to have government-run grocery stores. We're going to tax the rich. We're going to do all these things. It sounds, on the surface, it sounds very, it's very appealing. It's like, okay, I'm having a tough go at it. Everything's expensive. This guy is going to come in and make things cheaper. And so that's one of the things that worries me in New York City, sort of like the bastion of American capitalism and all these things. And so this guy's coming in and he's basically saying he wants to put in more government, right? So, I mean, even if you go to, I don't know if you've ever been in New York City, basically the whole place is a bunch of bodegas. There's no big Strack and Van Tills anywhere. It's a bunch of bodegas on every corner, a couple little grocery stores, but there's not a lot of giant Walmarts and, Stracks and Kroger's or Myers and things like that. It's a lot of little neighborhood grocery stores run by mom and pop, run by a lot of immigrants and things like that. And this guy's coming in and going, hey, the rent is too damn high, to quote another New York City candidate. And he basically says things are too expensive, so government's going to subsidize them. But one of the things that we know, and one of the things that Larry and I have been talking about today, is the idea that when government comes in to subsidize things, education is a perfect example of that. Government came in and said, college is too expensive. And since government came in and subsidized it and started doing student loans, guess what happened to the cost of education? It's gone absolutely through the roof. So this is one of my inherent issues with government, is government says, we're going to fix the problem, and they inherently make it worse. And that's why when I see somebody like Mom Dami coming in our country's largest city, coming in and saying, I want to bring in more government, I want to bring in government grocery stores, I want to, do all these things, it makes me nervous because he wants to fundamentally change how we do things in this country. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, from what I understand from it is that he wants to make these governmentally run grocery stores, right, so that they can set a price point, right? And then that's the price point around the entire area. I just don't see how that in turn drops prices or anything like that, other than set a baseline, because I feel like especially those local companies like those bodegas, I'm from Connecticut. I was born in Norwalk. It's an hour out from New York City. So I've been to a lot of those bodegas, and maybe they're not all the best quality, but sometimes most of the time they're cheaper. They're run by immigrants or they're run by local families. Like, they're not trying to pull your pockets.
Well, and that's the exact point, is that it's kind of like gas stations. If every gas station in my neighborhood had $3 gas and I had $5 gas, guess what? Nobody's buying my gas and I'm going out of business. So the same with the bodegas or any other marketplace, is that I have to remain competitive. So that becomes the idea of, I'm paying a certain amount for these products, whether I'm running a restaurant or grocery store, what have you. I'm paying a certain amount, and I have to look at my overhead costs. I have to look at my rent. I have to look at my employees, all of my costs, and then I want to charge a little bit more than that, just enough to make a little profit and call it a day. And if I charge too much, well, I'm out of business. So this idea that, that the little mom and pop bodega in New York City is price gouging. Well, if they did that, then they'd be out of business. In most cases, the margins on like a marketplace like that is like 1 or 2%. It's next to nothing. Right. But then how is that fair? Like, let's say your family ran bodegas or ran a grocery store in New York City, and this guy comes in and says, I can sell groceries cheaper because guess what? Government's not going to charge itself rent, not going to charge itself taxes, and it has no profit motive. So now all of a sudden, I don't have any of those expenses. So I can open up a government-run grocery store across the street from your bodega, and I could charge like 5 or 10% less because government doesn't need to make a profit.
So then I'm curious. Like I said, you're educating me. So then, how does that in turn boost like prices and stuff like that? I don't know.
Well, okay. So then this becomes the question: is it's not necessarily boosting prices, but when you bring in, so let's say the example of government run anything. When government comes in, they're inherently going to pick and choose the loser. So again, your bodega is now 5 or 10% more expensive than the government run grocery store across the street. But also, there's an interesting thing. There's certain countries, I forget which, there's several countries where, for instance, they have government run liquor stores, right? And only government, I forget if it's, if somebody wants to call and remind me which one it is. There are certain countries that have government-run liquor stores, and nobody's allowed to sell liquor. So what happens is, guess what liquor you have at the liquor store? whatever government wants to sell, right? So if you want a certain kind of beer, you want a certain kind of vodka, if government doesn't want to sell it, they don't sell it. Unlike here, where I can go into the local liquor store and go, hey, why don't you guys start carrying this new beer or whatever? And you can, and if there's demand for it, the owner goes, hey, let's start bringing in this beer from wherever. In government, there is no motive for that. Or even the idea, Bernie Sanders famously said, he once went to the grocery store and said, why are there 33 kinds of deodorant? It's like, well, because there are people that want to buy. If there was 33 kinds of deodorant and we only bought 5 of them, guess what? The other 20 whatever would not be sold anymore. They'd sit on the shelves and the grocery store would go, look, nobody's buying, sandalwood, whatever. So we're going to stop carrying it, right? I mean, that's how the free market works, is that if everybody's buying, if nobody's buying Axe body spray anymore, I'm not going to have it taking up shelf space. So that's sort of the idea is, when it was interesting because Bernie Sanders was actually on Joe Rogan the other day, and they were having an interesting discussion about this, and Joe kept pushing him on some of the issues. And he's like, I don't know, Joe. I don't know. I'm not educated on it. But these are the kind of guys that famously say, why are there 33 kinds of deodorant? Well, because somebody's buying them, right? And I mean, that sort of becomes my issue with even a lot of these philosophies is we know that these things are not going to work, but why are people supporting it? And that's what's really interesting about what's happening in New York. Is it because Cuomo was the only other option? Everybody hates Cuomo? I don't know. But it's interesting to see young people, and Bernie's another example of that, of young people sort of gravitating toward these socialist ideas because they sound very appealing. And that's sort of the thing is I wonder, does it sound appealing because they don't have that historical record of like, hey, these things don't work? Or is it just because, hey, look, things are tough for me, and this guy has a solution that sounds promising? So that's always kind of my question. 219-845-1100. If you guys have any thoughts on this. Otherwise, we're just going to talk about this because, like I said, I found this interesting. But so you're talking about moving back towards Connecticut at some point, right?
We actually had just bought a house. I think it closes on the 18th of July.
Yeah. So Connecticut's an interesting place because a lot of people that get jobs in New York, it's kind of like what we do in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to work in New York, but then where do they move? They move to Connecticut, they move to New Jersey, and they take the train or whatever into the city, right? I mean, and that sort of becomes another interesting thing is like, so one of the things that Mamdani is pushing is sort of this idea, and Cuomo already did this, sort of the millionaire's tax, wealth taxes. Mamdani went so far as to say he wants to tax like white communities more than other communities, and a lot of just sort of what I would call radical ideas. And all I see coming out of that is the people that can afford to move to Connecticut, or even if they're wealthy enough they can afford to just move to Florida, then go, you know what, I'm out. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with your taxes. I don't want to deal with these crazy ideas. I'm just moving out. And that's one of the things that I don't think gets discussed enough is this idea that the people that he's specifically targeting are the ones that can afford to move to Connecticut.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that was kind of similar to something that was happening around here, like when COVID started, right? We started to get like a kind of a mad surge of people moving into Indiana from Illinois. And I don't know if, obviously, I don't think it all has to do with COVID, but it may do with property taxes rising and just overall, I mean, those people have the opportunity to move, right? If you're going to target the people that have the money, then they're just going to go somewhere else with it.
Well, and that was the argument during COVID was like, hey, I don't need to go into the office every day, so I can move further away. I can go buy a farm somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I don't have to go into the office very often. And so same idea. It's like, that's what I wonder about for a place like New York City is, I've never been a city guy. I don't know what really attracts people to be, I don't know why you'd pay $2,500 a month to live in a closet, above a restaurant in New York. It never was appealing to me. When I meet young people that want to move to Chicago or New York, I'm kind of like, okay, well, what is the appeal there? I'm one of those guys. I need peace and quiet at night. All the fire trucks and, the garbage trucks would keep me awake at night. But it's sort of one of those things, to your point. What happens when we get to this society that no longer revolves around going to stuff or, wanting to live in the big city so you can go to the bar and hang out with people and go to these restaurants? when people have the option of not being there anymore, I can move to Connecticut, I can move to New Jersey, I get the same apartment, or I could buy a house for half of what I pay for this tiny apartment in Brooklyn. I mean, I seriously wonder if these policies are going to be the thing that finally starts pushing people out of the cities. And even we talk about here in the region where places like Dyer and St. John have doubled in size, people are moving away from that. What does that mean for the future? What does that mean for the next generation? So, do you have a call? You want to take?
We do, but let's take a quick
Yeah,
break
let's take a
real quick.
break. Okay, let's take a break. We're going to reset. I'm only going to do a few more minutes, and then we'll get out of here. So, we're going to reset Summer of Chuck 2, the Electric Boogaloo. We'll take your calls after this.